Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
You ever hear that story about the lady who found like a big toe or thumb in her chili at Wendy's? Or the guy who found a rat in his previously unopened can of soda? Now, I've been over it time and time again with my staff here at Dead and Roasted, and the debate is over. I've now made it clear that from today forward, we will no longer be placing body parts in our beverages. Speaking of dead parts, today's stories are all about those people who found themselves working at graveyards. People who encountered terrifying and horrible things where the dead are supposed to rest. Enjoy. Do you have a scary work story? Well, what are you waiting for? Send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. And do you like this show and consider yourself a fan? What are you waiting for as well? Follow and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to help us grow. Thank you. And if you want to go the extra mile, pre-order my new book coming out July 8th, 2025, called Creepy Campfire Stories. Go to Amazon.com and search for Creepy Campfire Stories, or click the link below. Thank you. Now, these are Tales from the Break Room. Half the Woman She Used to Be. From Neck044. I'm Tyler. I was 20 when this happened last year. I dropped out of my community college after 3 semesters because, honestly, I had no clue what I was doing there, except burning through student loans. My parents weren't exactly thrilled, but they'd been through the same song and dance with my older sister before, who eventually got her act together, so they gave me 6 months of a break to find a job before they'd reevaluate my living situation. Translation: get your crap together or get out. I applied everywhere: retail, restaurants, warehouses. But it turns out a history of skipping classes doesn't exactly build the kind of work ethic employers are looking for. Who knew? When I landed a security guard position at a local memorial/graveyard, I felt like I'd won the lottery. $12 an hour, and all I had to do was basically sit on my rear all night in a little guard shack by the entrance. The job posting had said, Facility and Grounds Security, which sounded official enough for my resume. Grounds turned out to mean graveyard, as I mentioned, like an actual cemetery with dead people and all that. Funny enough, they barely brought that up in the interview. It was just a precaution, my supervisor had assured me during my one-night training session. My supervisor was about 50, with the sagging face of someone who'd seen too much of life and decided it wasn't worth getting excited about anymore. I did not want to end up like him. Now, we've had some vandalism issues in the past. Teenagers, mostly. Your job is to walk the grounds once every 2 hours, check that the mausoleum is secure, and call the police if you see anything suspicious. The rest of the time, I was just free to watch Netflix or read or whatever, as long as I stayed awake and didn't leave the property. Easy money. The first few shifts I had were boring as heck. I would do my rounds, shining my flashlight between headstones, trying not to get freaked out. Then I'd return to the guard shack. Really, it was just a small office building, with a desk, mini fridge, microwave, and bathroom. I'd scroll through TikTok until it was time to do the rounds again. By the second week, I was dying for human interaction. When my buddy Maddie texted me asking what was up, I mentioned my job. "Seriously? You're guarding dead people now?" He texted back. I mean, he wasn't wrong, right? "That's wild. Can we come hang? Me and Parker are bored." I wasn't sure just yet, but after 3 seconds, I said, "Sure, after midnight. Park on the street and walk on in. I don't want the cameras catching your car." That's how it started. Just a stupid decision because I was lonely and bored when I was supposed to be working. Maddie and Parker showed up around 12:30, carrying a bag of chips and energy drinks. No alcohol, though. We weren't complete idiots. Just regular idiots. "Dude, this place is so creepy," Parker said, looking around the small office. Parker was the nervous type, always expecting the worst out of every situation. We'd been friends since high school, mainly because he'd laugh at all my jokes, even when they weren't funny. Maddie dropped into the spare chair, saying, "Could be worse. My cousin works night shift at a meat processing plant. If the boredom doesn't kill you, the smells will." We spent the next hour just shooting the breeze. It did feel good to talk to someone after a week of solitude. Around 1:30 a.m., the conversation turned to what we were all doing with our lives. Maddie said, "I'm thinking about going back to finish my degree. My dad says the electrician program only takes 2 years and they're always hiring." "Smart," Parker said. "I'm already 20 grand in debt and not even halfway through my program. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." "At least you're working towards something," I said. "I've got debt and nothing to show for it." "That's why this job is perfect for you. Dead-end job and a literal dead end," Maddie laughed. "Ha ha," I rolled my eyes. "It's temporary. Just until I figure things out." Parker got a little too serious, and his version of serious was anything but to me. "Aren't we all temporary, though? Like all these people buried out here, man. They had plans too." "Oh God, Parker. Way to bring down the..." A scream cut off Maddie mid-sentence. It was high-pitched and terrifying. A woman's voice, somewhere outside in the dark. I think the three of us stopped breathing then and looked at each other. "What the heck?" I started. "Tell me you heard that," Parker whispered. The scream came again. It didn't sound like someone messing around or playing a prank. It sounded like someone in torment. "Dude, you're the security guard. We need to check that out," Maddie said, already standing up. "Are you insane?" Parker argued. "That's how people get killed." I grabbed my flashlight. "No, he's right. Someone could be hurt out there. It's literally my job to investigate suspicious activity." Reluctantly, Parker followed us outside. The night was cold, and just perfect because there was a light fog between the gravestones. I aimed my flashlight ahead, and we moved toward where we thought the sound had come from. "Hello?" I tried my best to sound like I had some sense of authority. "This is security. Is anyone out there?" Silence. We wandered through the gravestones for about 10 minutes, calling out here and there, listening for a response or anything, but got nothing. "I swear it came from over here," Maddie insisted, pointing toward an old section of the cemetery. We followed him to an area I'd noticed during my rounds, but I never paid much attention to it till now. The gravestones here were different, much older, more weathered. Some were tilted a bit, like they might fall over at the slightest touch. Unlike the meticulously maintained newer sections, this part looked neglected, forgotten even. I swept my light across the names and dates. They were from the early 1900s and some even older than that. I don't remember the first name, but the one I came across read, Crane, 1879 through 1902. Beloved daughter. "Can we go back now?" Parker was desperate to go back to the office. "There's nobody out here." "I guess. Maybe it was an animal." Honestly, I didn't know, though I didn't know of any animal that could make a sound like that. We went back to the guard shack, all of us a bit creeped out but relieved to be back inside. "That was weird," Maddie said, dropping back into the chair. "You think in some crazy physics way wind could sound like that?" I remember Parker rolling his eyes. "Maddie, wind doesn't scream, 'Help me' in a woman's voice." "Did you actually hear words?" I asked him. "All I heard was screaming." Parker looked at me confused. You didn't hear her begging for help? Maddie and I looked at each other, then back at him. Maddie confirmed, I didn't hear any words either, dude. Great. So I'm the paranoid one, hearing ghosts. That's reassuring. He grabbed another energy drink, probably to take the edge off. I tried to laugh about it, but I wasn't fully relaxed just yet. After a while, Maddie started to tell a story about a prank he'd pulled in high school. And after that, we were all joking again, no longer tense. But that was when the scream came back. This time, there was no mistaking it, especially after what followed sounded like sobbing. That's it, Parker said, standing up. I'm leaving. Wait, I grabbed his arm. We need to check this out. What if there really is someone hurt? Then call the cops, he argued. Isn't that your protocol? He was correct, but something compelled me to take a look first. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have much to show or tell the police. Imagine calling the cops at your job, they show up, and all you say is, I heard a creepy scream. When they go out and look and find nothing, I'd probably get in some trouble. Just one more quick check, man, I insisted. We'll go together. Do you really want to walk back to the car alone? That seemed to convince Parker. He didn't seem so sure at first, but he relented. The sobbing sound was continuous, making it easier to follow. It led us back to the same section of old graves, but now the sound seemed to be moving. So I was certain it was coming from someone who shouldn't be here, not a ghost or anything like that. Hey, we're here to help, I tried to say, but the crying then stopped. There, Maddie pointed to something on the ground about 20 feet ahead. I pointed my flashlight, and there I found it. When I saw it, it felt like the world was spinning. Legs. A woman's legs, severed at the waist, lying in the damp grass between two gravestones. She was, or had been, wearing a long white skirt, now soaked with blood. The cut was jagged and horrible, bits of spine and viscera visible in the flashlight's beam. Parker threw up. Maddie, I think, was just standing there. We need to call the cops, I managed to say. Right now. I took out my phone, my hands shaking worse than ever. I dialed 911. I explained where we were and what we'd found, and dispatch told us to return to the guard shack and wait for officers to arrive. We didn't need to be told. We practically ran back to that office, none of us wanting to be near that grotesque display a second longer than necessary. And we didn't speak. The three of us looked like shell-shocked soldiers. We had just found a human being, torn in half, just discarded in some graveyard. About 15 minutes later, the police showed up. 2 officers in a patrol car. I was honestly surprised that an ambulance or whoever they send for dead bodies didn't show up. I met them at the entrance and led them toward the old section, explaining what we found. We were doing a routine patrol, I lied, leaving out the part about my friends coming for a visit. When we heard screaming, I investigated and found her. The officers looked appropriately serious as I led them to the spot. Except when we got there was nothing there. I don't understand. It was right here between these 2 graves. The officers went from concerned to stern. Son, the older one said, have you been drinking tonight? What? No, I've been working. All right, how about drugs? Anything that might cause hallucinations? I'm telling you, there was a body, half a body, right here. There was blood, a white skirt. I was starting to freak out on them, probably making a worse case for myself. The younger guy was examining the ground with his own light. No blood here. No disturbance in the grass at all. That's impossible. My friends saw it too. Friends? I thought you said you investigated it and found it. I closed my eyes for a second, knowing I messed up. I had some friends visit during my shift. They're back at the guard shack. The officers had me lead them to the office. Parker and Maddie were waiting there and looked even more terrified when they saw the police. They questioned all of us separately and established that, yes, we actually did see the same thing, but no, there was no evidence of it now. They seemed to be at a loss. Listen, the older officer finally said, addressing all of us. Making false reports is a serious offense. So is trespassing on private property after hours. He pointed at my friends. We're not making anything up, sir. We saw it, Maddie insisted. And now it's gone. No blood, no body parts, no evidence of any kind that a crime occurred, or that anyone else was out in this cemetery tonight. Maybe someone moved it while we were waiting for you guys, Parker said, but he looked ready to pass out after saying it. The guy was horrible under pressure. The younger officer shook his head. We responded quite quickly, within minutes of the call. The area between here and where you claim to have found the remains has been in our line of sight the entire time. Nobody has come or went. I'm gonna chalk this up to a combination of late-night jitters, guys. Maybe you were telling each other scary stories, possibly doing some substance that we're not detecting, the older officer told us. But consider this your warning. Next time we're called out here for nothing, there will be consequences. Understand me? We agreed. After they left, the three of us sat there in silence for several more minutes. Eventually, Maddie spoke up. What the actual heck just happened? I don't know, man, I said. We all saw it, right? I'm not losing my mind? We saw it, Parker confirmed. But how could it just disappear? Well, we didn't have an answer to that. We decided Parker and Maddie would stay until my shift ended at 6 a.m. Safety in numbers, even if we were dealing with something that defied explanation. By 3:30 a.m., we heard the scream again. Maybe it was just us being scared now, but it sounded worse, like it was in even more agony. We stayed put, huddled in that office, lights on and doors locked. Ignore it, I kept telling the two of them. It's not real. But it sounded very real. So real that every instinct told me to help, to find whoever was in such pain. The screams lasted for nearly 20 minutes before abruptly getting cut off. Cut off. I hate the sound of that now. The silence afterwards was even worse somehow. We sat there for a while, waiting for the next sound, whatever that might be. After a few minutes, there was a soft tap on the door. Tap, tap, tap. None of us moved, even as I thought for just a moment that it might be the officers coming back for some reason. Tap, tap, tap. Louder now. Don't, Maddie whispered when I glanced towards the door. The tapping then became a knock, and soon a pounding that shook the door. Then the pounding stopped. For a moment, I thought whoever it was had finally given up. But then came laughter. It started as a low chuckle, then built into a hysterical, unhinged laugh. I felt like the butt of a joke. Then, all at once, it stopped. Complete silence once more. None of us spoke or moved until the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. Only then did we go outside. I remember feeling so paranoid that we'd open the door and there'd be another half of a person just lying there. But instead, we found a peaceful-looking cemetery in the morning light. My replacement arrived at 6 a.m., looking annoyingly well-rested. I handed over my flashlight and keys without explanation, signed out, and left with Maddie and Parker. We didn't talk about what happened in the car. We tried to bring up different conversation that was very forced, and it did help relieve some of the tension. I called my supervisor that morning, told him I wouldn't be coming back. I explained it wasn't worth it. And that's it. A couple weeks later, I re-enrolled in my community college. I decided to major in accounting. Nothing exciting happens to accountants, right? And that seemed very appealing. Ever since then, I've never truly been back to the graveyard, but some of my destinations brought me driving by. But when I do drive by, I force myself not to look in that direction, because I'm scared I'll see something again. So far, so good. No more half corpses, no more laughing. This was by far the scariest experience I've ever had at any job. And it's enough to give a person PTSD. Why have a break room when you can have a break yard? From Ish Ole. When I used to work as a cop, I would use the cemetery at the edge of town for my unofficial break spot. I found it by accident, actually, responding to a call about teenagers drinking out there. But usually, there's no kids, just quiet. The perfect place to eat or smoke, or just sit without dispatch or the sergeant breathing down your neck for 20 minutes. Nothing spectacular about the place. About 6 acres of flat land with a chain-link fence and an unlocked gate. Far as I've seen, there's headstones dating back from the 1800s and up, with the newer ones up front. There are some trees around the perimeter, oaks and a few pine trees. The middle area is wide open, though. Just graves and short grass and sky. For 2 years straight, that was my spot, and nothing crazy ever happened there. I parked my cruiser, ate a sandwich, listened to the scanner, then headed back to patrol. Sometimes I'd walk between the headstones, though, reading names, wondering what kind of lives these people lived. It was peaceful. One evening, I was midway through a turkey sub sandwich when I heard it. This weird sound, like a cough, but deeper, and I thought maybe it was an animal call of some sort. Maybe a big buck, maybe a sickly coyote. We've gotten both before, though they usually avoid people. I clicked on my mag light and swept the beam across the graveyard. I didn't see anything. No figures, no movement. I began to eat my sandwich again, chalking it up to my imagination. About a minute or two later, I heard it again. Definitely some sort of super deep, rough cough, followed by heavy breathing. Mid-bite, I called out, "Police officer!" I swallowed, then told them to identify themselves. But it was just quiet for the next minute. I set my food down and stepped away from the vehicle. Our department teaches that we should investigate any suspicious circumstances, even off call. The cemetery was flat and open, and my cruiser was parked on the access road cutting through the middle. To my left, maybe 50 yards away, I swear I caught movement. And then I saw something large. I directed my light towards it, but there was nothing there. Until I saw something in my beam as I continued to sweep. 2 eyes. Blue. But these eyes were way too high. I'm 5'11", and these eyes had to be at least 9 feet off the ground. Nothing to stand on out there, I'm telling you. No monuments tall enough in that section. Just flat ground and modest headstones. Training kicks in when fear hits. Maintain visual contact, radio for backup if necessary, identify the threat. I looked behind me for a moment, making sure I didn't run into something, and when I turned to head again, The eyes were gone, but then they reappeared 20 yards to my right. There had been no sound of movement, no visible figure below them, just eyes floating in the shadows. I wanted to follow procedure. I wish that was my instinct in this situation. I wish I could say I had the balls to investigate, or at minimum call it in. But I didn't. I power-walked right over to my cruiser and drove away. I drove straight to the 24-hour diner across town and drank some coffee until I felt a bit better. Nothing crazy happened, no crime was committed, so I didn't have anything to report. I avoided that cemetery for a while after that. Found a new spot, an empty parking lot behind an abandoned Walmart. Not as peaceful, but nothing looked at me from impossible heights. A few months passed by. Management changed at the precinct. A new sergeant was riding everyone hard about staying visible in patrol zones. No more extended breaks in empty parking lots. After a pretty rough domestic call one day, I needed some quiet, despite the new rules. My old cemetery spot was calling to me. Just one more time, I told myself. A quick break, stay in the car, then back to patrol. 20 minutes to midnight. It was cold enough to see my breath. I remember there was a half moon in the sky, giving off just enough light to make out the rows of headstones. I parked in my usual spot and unwrapped some dinner. Meatloaf, cold but edible. And to be real with you, I preferred it cold. I kept the engine running and the heater on. I had the windows up and the radio was on low, and I was hyper aware of my surroundings in a way I'd never been before. Nothing unusual happened for a while. It was quiet and I was enjoying my food. The occasional static from dispatch made me jump a little bit, but I was really relaxed again, thinking maybe that night a while back was just stress, fatigue, a large bird I'd somehow misidentified. I suddenly heard something, though. Footsteps, extremely heavy footsteps, circling my cruiser. The instinct to dismiss the sound fought with my training to investigate, and my training won. I reached for my maglite, rolled down the window just enough to point it out. The beam caught nothing but headstones and frost-covered grass. The footsteps stopped the moment my window opened, as if whoever was out there, or whatever, had heard it. I waited and listened. Nothing. But then suddenly, something scraped against the rear bumper of my cruiser. A sound like heavy fabric or fur brushing metal. I spun around in my seat, pointing the flashlight toward the back window. For a split second, I caught the sight of something. Something big and brown and covered in fur. This wasn't a person, and it was way too big to be a coyote or a deer. I know I saw it, ducking down behind my vehicle, just out of sight. My heart became jellified. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, leaving my training in the dust. I dropped my light, forgot my food, and put the cruiser in drive, pulling away forward. The whole time I watched the rear view. But when I pulled forward, there was nothing behind me. Nothing visible, anyway. An empty cemetery where something large enough to look into my window had been seconds earlier. Something that could not have disappeared in the open ground behind my vehicle. But somehow, it had. I never went back there again. I gave up my spot. To this day, I have no idea what I saw. Don't really want to know, honestly. I've responded to calls near there, but never alone and never at night. So many years on the force teaches you most things have an explanation. That the real monsters are people. But it also teaches you this. Sometimes the explanation is simply that there are things in this world that you can't explain. And maybe monsters aren't just people like you and I sometimes. The scariest thing that ever happened to me. From Geoffrey R. This story I'm about to share with you is the reason why I cannot stand churches. Not because I'm not a religious guy, or anything deep like that. It's because of what happened when I was 9 years old at the chapel my dad used to work at, or occasionally work at. Dad wasn't a full-time gravedigger. He worked in construction mostly, but he had this arrangement with the priest, who also managed the cemetery. Whenever they needed an extra hand for a burial, or whenever someone called in sick, Dad would fill in. Dad had said it was extra pay that he sorely needed back in the summer of 2003. If I recall right, Mom had just lost her job back then. She had been working at the bank and got laid off. When that happened, I recall thinking, if a bank is laying people off, that can't be good. Maybe my kid self was onto something, or I was just silly. It was late June, a blistering Alabama afternoon, where the humidity makes it feel like you're breathing through a wet towel or something. School had been out for about 2 weeks by then, and Dad got a call from the priest asking if he could finish a grave that evening. The regular guy had heat exhaustion or something. Sorry, a lot of this is old memories, but as I get closer to the events of the story, things will get a bit more sharp. I remember my dad asked if my mom could watch me that evening. He was jingling his keys in his hand, ready to go. Mom had to take my little sister to some doctor's appointment 2 towns over, saying they wouldn't be back till dinner. And back then I couldn't watch myself. Wasn't old enough. With a sigh, my dad looked down at me and said, "Guess you're coming with me, bud." And he told me to grab something to keep myself busy. I grabbed my Game Boy Advance. I got that cool transparent purple one for Christmas. And my grandparents got me Pokemon Ruby, and that was my obsession at the time. I was working on completing my Pokedex, and I had just caught a trapinch in that desert area. The drive to the church/graveyard was about 15 minutes, and it was mostly quiet, except for Dad's talk radio and the rattling air conditioner in our old Chevy. When we pulled up to the cemetery gates, the priest was there waiting in a golf cart. He said something along the lines of, "Sorry about this," that the usual gravedigger had left him high and dry with the burial that needed done, that the family would be coming tomorrow morning at 9, so Dad basically had a hole to dig the rest of. Dad told him no problem, and asked him where his kid could wait, pointing to me, said it was too hot to leave me in the car. I remember looking up and the priest looked at me, then pointed to the small white chapel at the edge of the cemetery. "Chapel's open, air conditioning's on for tomorrow's service, nobody's in there right now." Dad said perfect, then turned to me, telling me to stay put in there until I was done, and not to go wandering around the graves. "Yes sir," I said, already pulling out my Game Boy. I wasn't planning on exploring anything that wasn't rendered in pixels. The chapel was small but nice, with maybe 15 rows of wooden pews. There was sunlight streaming through some stained glass windows, and I thought it looked pretty cool. And the air was practically blissful, compared to the swampy heat outside. I slid into a pew about halfway to the front, kicking off my shoes and settling in. The church was super quiet. Only thing I could hear was the air conditioner. I powered on my Game Boy. The startup sound echoed in the empty space. It was funny playing Pokemon in church. A year or 2 before that, maybe a bit earlier, I'm not sure, our neighbor had been telling my mom that Pokemon was teaching kids to summon demons. She'd seen it on the Christian channel. Mom rolled her eyes at that, and when the neighbor left, she told me not to listen to all that and not to worry about it. "Some people see the devil in everything," she told me. Dad was even more direct about it. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," he said. My parents were pretty cool like that. Still, sitting there in that empty church with my game, I felt a little bit rebellious. Like maybe I was getting away with something I shouldn't be. I had been playing for about 20 minutes, grinding levels in the tall grass outside Four Tree City, when I first heard it. A sound from the hallway to my left. The hallway that led to the rest of the building, I assumed. It was pretty faint, like someone shifting their weight on the old floor. But then, unmistakably, I heard footsteps. I looked up from my game then, thinking I was going to see the priest, but the hallway was dark, so dark that I couldn't see much past it. The footsteps sounded like they walked right up to the edge where the hallway met the sanctuary, then stopped. Just at the boundary between light and dark. I couldn't see anyone standing there, though. I wanted to call out, but I was an awkward kid, and I didn't want to bring attention to myself if it was a stranger, a worker staying behind late. But then, so quick and fleeting I nearly missed it. "Come here." It wasn't very loud at all, so it wasn't particularly scary in itself. Just those two words spoken like someone trying to get my attention without making much noise. I stared back at the hallway, squinting to see if someone was playing a joke. I called out, asking if it was the priest, saying, "Is that you?" But there was no more talking. I thought I'd imagined it then, that the air conditioner was making some sounds, which sounded like words in some way. Could have been the game's sound effects echoing in the sanctuary too, I thought. After a moment, I went back to playing, though I turned the volume down quite a bit. For about 10 minutes, everything was normal again. I caught a swablu and was pretty excited about it, since I needed one for my Pokedex. I was reabsorbed in the game the way kids often get, forgetting about everything else around me. But then I heard it again. "Come here." It was much clearer, still at the edge of where I couldn't see who might be speaking, but it was definitely real. I saved my game, because even when you're scared, a kid has his priorities, and I switched off the power. "Somebody there?" I called back, trying to sound as brave as my dad might be in this kind of situation. "This isn't funny." Still, no one replied to me. I slid to the end of the pew, feeling goosebumps on the back of my neck. The hallway was maybe 20 feet or so away from me, and from that angle I could see a little better, but it was still too dark to make out anything clearly. Still no sign of anyone. "I'm gonna tell my dad," I warned no one in particular, a threat that certainly wouldn't work against a murderer or kidnapper if that's what it was. "He's right outside." I had that feeling you get when you know someone is watching you, even when you can't see them. I was trying to work up the courage to either go look in the hallway myself or run outside when something happened. Thump, thump, thump. 3 loud footsteps, starting much closer than the hallway, walked right up to me, as if whatever had been there had somehow crossed the space between us without walking the distance. After those 3 steps, it was just right there, and yet I didn't see anything. The sudden sounds made me scream, a quick startled yelp, like a hurt puppy. I clapped my hands over my ears too, and squeezed my eyes shut. That was the fastest my heart ever raced. For a while I stayed frozen like that, my eyes shut, ears covered, and waiting. I waited for whatever it was to go away, to leave me alone, to hopefully just be my imagination. When nothing happened after that, I slowly lowered my hands and opened my eyes back up. The church looked exactly the same. Empty pews, colored lights from the stained glass. No one in there with me. I began to breathe again. Just nothing. Dad always did say my imagination worked overtime. "Come here." Right in my ear, I heard it again. So close I could feel someone's breath. I dropped my Game Boy and ran as fast as I could to the front of the church, opening the 2 heavy wooden doors. My next clear memory is standing in the cemetery, screaming and crying, my throat going raw. Dad came running from somewhere among the headstones, his shovel still in his hand, dirt on his jeans. His face went from annoyed to concerned in an instant when he saw me. "Geoffrey?" What happened? Are you hurt?" He knelt down and put his hands on my shoulders, checking me for injuries. I couldn't stop crying long enough to form complete sentences. "Someone in the church, it said come here right in my ear." "Slow down, son," Dad said. His voice was so calm and serious. "You heard someone in the church with you?" I nodded like a crazy person, repeatedly and frantically, and pointed back at the building. "In the hallway, it was right beside me, but I couldn't see anyone." Dad looked at the chapel. "Stay right here by the gate, okay? Don't move." He jogged over to his truck, pulling something out from under the seat. I realized later it was a baseball bat, which he always kept there. Then he headed inside the church. I watched him push open the doors and disappear inside, all while I sat there shaking like a leaf. Those were the longest 5 minutes of my life. I stood by the cemetery gate, terrified that my dad would never come back, that whatever had whispered to me in there had dragged my dad away to hell, all because I played Pokemon in the sanctuary. When he finally came back, he was holding my Game Boy. "Nobody there," he said. He handed me my game. I checked all the rooms and closets everywhere. Doors were all locked from the inside except the front. "But I believe you heard something," Dad explained. "But there's nobody in there now. Probably the AC making some weird noise. Old buildings talk sometimes, son." Even then, I didn't think it was just the building. Not just the air conditioner either. Buildings don't walk up to you from nowhere and whisper in your ear with breath you can feel on your skin. But I also understood the look on my dad's face. The look that said, "Quit asking about it." On the drive home, Dad tried to distract me by asking about my Pokemon game. I answered in just single words. Eventually he said, "Listen, I have to help the priest again next week. If you want, you can wait in the car instead. I'll leave the truck on so you can run the AC." It was his way of acknowledging what happened without actually saying he believed me. I agreed to it and felt way more relieved. I never did have to go back inside that church. On the days I had to go back with Dad in the cemetery, I'd sit in the car with the doors locked, windows up, even in the hottest part of summer. Sometimes I'd look toward the chapel and wonder if something was standing in the hallway, waiting for another visitor. Dad didn't bring up the incident with me again, but a few weeks after that, I did overhear him talking to my mom when they probably thought I was sleeping. "Chapel's built on the oldest part of that graveyard," he was saying. "Ed told me they moved headstones but not the bodies when they built it in 1962. He said that sometimes that old organ plays itself during funerals. Just a few notes." "You think Geoffrey really heard something?" my mom asked. There was a long pause before my dad answered. "I don't know what he heard, but when I went in there to grab his game, it was cold in there. Middle of June, AC struggling to keep up, but right there in the middle of the aisle, cold as January." "Jim, I'm not saying it was anything, hun, but I'm not gonna make him go back in there, okay?" That was about 20 years ago. Dad stopped doing cemetery work a year later when he got promoted at his construction job. That chapel actually burned down in 2011. Electrical fire, they said. They built a new one, bigger and brighter, hopefully with no dark hallways on the inside. I've gone to churches since then, for weddings or funerals or Christmas services with my wife's family. Never had another bad experience with one. And it didn't scare me away from Pokemon. The newer versions on my Switch I still play. I've played through Sword and Shield with my daughter. No problem there. But you better believe for the good part of a decade after that experience, I was pretty afraid of the dark. It seems it's not just strange people that you should ignore when they tell you to come here in a whispered voice, but also those things you can't even see when they're right in front of you. Confessions of a Caretaker. From Anonymous. I was 24 years old when this happened. A biology undergrad with plans for environmental science graduate work. Rational to a fault, according to my own friends. I was a skeptical person about the paranormal, ghost stories and all that. Never really thought I'd be submitting a story to a podcast like this, but here I am. I know what I experienced, even if I can't fully explain it. Maybe someone out there can make sense of what happened to me during those 6 weeks I spent alone at that cemetery. I took a winter caretaker position at the cemetery. I needed to save money for grad school applications. The listing promised free housing and minimal responsibilities. Just basic groundskeeping stuff and security for 5 months during the off-season. What they didn't mention was why the position had opened up in the first place. I arrived in the afternoon. The County Parks Department admin handed me keys with a tight smile. I was told by her the previous caretaker had left unexpectedly. "Personal health issues. Nothing to worry about," she said. She hurried through some paperwork, and I left. Didn't give it a second thought. The cabin itself was smaller than I expected. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a bathroom that felt like an afterthought. Everything had been thoroughly cleaned. I could still smell the bleach in the place. But it didn't really help that much. There was still this musty undertone. What struck me odd at first were the locks. Every interior door had a new deadbolt installed, even the bathroom. Who needs to lock themselves in the bathroom of a graveyard? I found the maintenance logbook at the kitchen counter. The previous caretaker had kept meticulous records at first. Flipping through it, I saw fertilizer schedules, equipment maintenance, weather patterns. But as the logbook went on, the entries became shorter. Less about cemetery maintenance, and more about disturbances at night. I read, "Scratching sounds in east wall again," and another part that said, "Noise in the walls, 2:17 a.m. I almost called the Parks Department right then. But it was already after hours and I needed this job, even if the logbook was a bit eerie. The caretaker's mental health was not my concern, after all. Maybe the isolation had gotten to him out here. The cemetery was nearly 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by dense forest. Perfect for someone like me who needed solitude to study, but perhaps not for everybody. During my first week there, I installed winter grave blankets on the newer plots. It was then that I noticed the depressions in the soil near the older section of headstones. They were too uniform to be animal burrows. They were small and perfectly round holes, about the diameter of a golf ball. They appeared in clusters around certain graves. When I mentioned them to my supervisor over the phone, he shrugged it off. Told me to just fill them in if they bothered me that much. They did bother me, but I had other concerns by then. The scratching started on my 6th night. I thought it was mice in the walls. An old building in the woods would naturally have rodents. It was actually a relief that the creepy notes in the logbook were just about mice in the walls. But then again, mice don't usually follow you from room to room through the walls. These sounds did. Whenever I moved to a different part of the cabin, the scratching would stop, then resume in the wall closest to where I stood. It was subtle at first and easy to dismiss, but it grew more insistent as the days wore on. I discovered the basement door almost by accident. The cabin's lower level had a dirt floor and stone foundation, used mainly for storage. The door was set into the north wall, hidden partially behind an old shelving unit. Unlike the rough stonework around it, this door was solid metal and had a heavy padlock. It looked much newer than the cabin itself. My curiosity got the better of me. The padlock key was on my keyring, labeled Drainage Access. Inside it was a narrow tunnel, maybe 3 feet high, lined with old ceramic pipes that branched off in different directions. The air smelled like old wet dirt and something metallic. The maintenance binder had no maps of this drainage system, which seemed odd for something so extensive and new. I locked the door back up and tried not to think about it. But that night, the scratching came back, louder, and with it was a tapping sound, almost rhythmic. I started to leave the radio on just to drown it out. Late into the month, I noticed 2 more unsettling patterns. First, my cell phone, which would work perfectly everywhere on the cemetery grounds, full signal strength too, would stop working inside the cabin only after the sun went down. What kind of sense does that make? I could stand in the doorway with perfect reception, take 1 step inside, and lose all bars. Again, it made no technical sense. Second, things began to disappear, only to reappear later in different places. My pocket knife vanished from the nightstand drawer. I found it 3 days later in the kitchen, tucked behind the toaster somehow. A missing sock of mine turned up stuffed into a heating vent, the fabric all frayed and damp. That was weird. I didn't want to end up like the previous caretaker, seeing threats and shadows, but I couldn't deny the evidence mounting around me. I started to lock my bedroom door at night, grateful for the new deadbolt that the Parks Department had installed without explanation. I began to lock the doors behind me as I moved through the small space of the cabin, just to be safe. One day, a delivery driver brought by some supplies I'd ordered online. He refused to even come close to the cabin. He left the package at the main cemetery gate, nearly a quarter-mile away. "Company policy for this address," he said, already backing toward his truck. Wouldn't even make eye contact with me. Wait, I called. "Did something happen here? Do you know why that's company policy?" The driver paused. I was thankful that he even listened to me at all. "I don't know much, sorry. Most I know is that the last guy who worked here was really strange and scared the previous delivery driver. So now we just leave stuff at the gate." I thanked him and took my package back to the cabin. That night, I swear to God, I heard giggling behind the bathroom wall. It wasn't in my head, mind you. It was clear as day. I even stopped brushing my teeth, faced the wall, and listened to it. But it kept happening for a few seconds. Maybe I am crazy. Who knows? The next morning, though, I found these tiny muddy spots behind the toilet, like drops of mud, or maybe footprints. I took photos of it, called the Parks Department after that, but they didn't care. Snow came early that year. A heavy storm left the cemetery isolated, and the roads were impassable for days. I took the time to investigate the basement tunnel a bit better. I removed the padlock, brought a flashlight, and a hammer for backup. When I opened up the tunnel, that metallic smell I mentioned before was now stronger. It smelled of copper. The drainage pipes were large enough for a small adult to crawl through, though I didn't attempt it. Instead, I simply photographed what I could see. But still, there was nothing of note. That night, I woke at 3 a.m. to whispering sounds outside the bedroom door. Multiple voices, high-pitched but quiet, like I'd stumbled upon the middle of a conversation. This lasted for a few minutes, and then there was silence. When I woke up in the morning, I was horrified to discover a trail of dirt leading from the basement door to my bed. Small boot prints, no mistaking it. I didn't stay another night. I packed a bag, locked the cabin behind me, and walked 2 miles through snow to the main road. I left the keys in the park department drop box with a note citing personal health reasons for my departure. They called me twice, asking questions about missing equipment and why I abandoned my position. I didn't mention the bedroom footprints or the whispering. I simply said that the isolation was not good for me. What in the heck is going on in that place, I'll never know. And it's not my responsibility anymore, so I don't care to know. That'll be up to the next guy to deal with. But if you have any guess, be my guest and let me know what you think. That last story reminded me of a movie called Alone in the Dark. Have you seen that movie? Well, one of those movies, because there's an old version and a remake with an insanely annoying little girl. Both are good. Make that your homework till I clock back in with more stories to chill your nights to the core. Send me your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit. Buy my new book, Creepy Campfire Stories, available for pre-order on Amazon right now, or just click the link in the description. And leave Tales from the Break Room a follow and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help us grow. Thank you. Till next time, everyone, stay creepy. This is Darkness Prevails, clocking out.